They said no one could fix it. The engine of the Navy's most advanced destroyer sat silent dead, just days before a mission that could not fail. Experts had tried everything. Every sensor tested, every system checked, and still nothing. Then, someone spoke a name most thought was long forgotten. When Carla Reyes walked into a hangar in grease-stained coveralls, she didn't just bring her tools. She brought a history, a reputation, and a secret the Navy had once buried deep. She asked for complete silence. And in the next 90 seconds, every engineer in that room would understand why. The hangar at Kitsap Naval Base was alive with movement. Forklifts humming down yellow-marked lanes, sparks flying from a welder's torch in the far corner, and the constant low mechanical growl of machinery being tested. Massive steel beams arched overhead. And in the center of it all sat the USS Bradford's LEM 2500 gas turbine engine, exposed and silent like a stranded giant. The mission clock was ticking. In less than 72 hours, the destroyer was set to lead a high-stakes escort operation in hostile waters. Without that engine, the mission was dead before it began, and the room smelled of desperation. 5 engineers huddled around the engine's open casing, muttering under their breath. Graphs and readouts flickered on the big screen behind them. RPM curves, vibration charts, fuel flow rates. They had tested every system, swapped out filters, replaced valves, and recalibrated the control board 3 times. Nothing worked. Chief Engineer Mark Garrison rubbed his temples and muttered, "It's over. We can't solve it in time." That's when Admiral Lawson spoke. "There's someone else we can call." Heads turned. The Admiral's tone carried weight. The kind that made people stop what they were doing. "He's not on the books anymore. But when I served on the Arleigh Burke trials, she fixed things no one else could even explain." Garrison scoffed. "If 5 of the Navy's best engineers can't fix it, what's one outsider going to do?" The Admiral didn't answer. He just stepped aside and let the echo of footsteps fill the hangar. She walked in like she'd been here before. Carla Reyes, late 30s, a striking mix of white and Asian heritage, had her jet black hair tied back, a pair of grease-streaked coveralls rolled at the sleeves, and a dented silver toolbox swinging in her hand. Her light brown eyes scanned the hangar in one slow sweep. She didn't look like the Navy's idea of a miracle worker. She looked ordinary, cute even. But the way she carried herself made even the youngest recruit stop smirking. The engineers gave her the kind of once-over they reserve for civilians. Mild curiosity mixed with skepticism. "You're Carla?" Garrison asked, barely disguising his doubt. "Last I checked," she replied, setting her toolbox down with a heavy metallic thunk. "Show me the patient." Admiral Lawson led her to the engine. It loses power after exactly 90 seconds at load. No alarms, no sensor faults, just a slow bleed and output until it stalls. "We've been at this for days." Carla crouched, peering into the exposed casing. Her fingers brushed over the metal like she was reading Braille. She didn't rush. She didn't speak. She just listened to the faint hiss of cooling valves, to the rhythmic clicking of a pressure regulator somewhere in the hangar. Then she looked. Up, power it on. The room went still. Garrison blinked. "Excuse me, start it up. Idle for 45 seconds, then full throttle." "That's insane." He snapped. "If there's internal damage, you could blow the rotor and take out half the casing. We need to follow safety protocol." Carla stood, meeting his glare. "Safety protocol won't find your problem. This engine's not going to talk to you on paper. It's going to talk when it's working." She tapped her temple. "And you have to listen." Garrison looked ready to argue, but Admiral Lawson cut him off. "Do it." The order rippled through the team. Technicians scrambled to their stations. A faint hum built in the hangar as the start sequence began. The LEM 2500's massive fan blades twitched, then spun faster, the sound growing from a low murmur to a deep resonant roar. Carla reached into her toolbox and pulled out a brass rod, worn smooth at both ends. She pressed one end to the engine housing and the other to her ear, her eyes closed. The entire hangar seemed to hold its breath. Even the usual background noise, the hiss of hydraulics, and the metallic clatter of tools went silent. 45 seconds. Carla raised her hand, signaling for full throttle. The engine's pitch climbed sharply, reverberating through the steel walls of the hangar. The vibration underfoot intensified. 56 seconds. Her brow furrowed, her breathing slowed. 68 seconds. She tilted her head slightly as if listening to a note only she could hear. 89 seconds. "Shut it down," she ordered. The roar faded to silence. The smell of hot metal and faint exhaust lingered in the air. Carla stepped back, rolling the brass rod between her fingers. It's not salt corrosion, not fuel contamination, and not a valve issue. You've got a rotor misalignment. It's drifting off-center under peak load, producing a harmonic vibration your sensors aren't picking up because it only happens in the last few seconds at full RPM. The engineers exchanged looks. One of them muttered, "That doesn't make sense." "We ran full diagnostics." "Diagnostics aren't ears," Carla interrupted. "Check your axial and radial clearances. Laser align the shaft. You'll find your problem." She wiped her hands on her coveralls, turned toward her toolbox, and started packing up. Garrison's voice was sharp. "You're suggesting 5 engineers missed a basic alignment issue." Carla didn't even look at him. "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm telling you whether you listen is your choice." She snapped her toolbox shut and slung it by her side. She was halfway to the hangar doors when Admiral Lawson called after her. "Carla, if you're right, you just saved the mission." She glanced back, the faintest smile tugging at her lips. "Then you're welcome." Outside, the wind off the water hit her face. The gulls wheeled overhead, their cries cutting through the heavy industrial air of the naval base. She walked towards the checkpoint at a steady pace, boots tapping against the wet asphalt. Behind her, in the cavernous hangar, the engineers were already moving. Someone shouted for a laser alignment kit. Another barked orders for clearance. Measurements. Carla didn't need to see it. She already knew they'd find exactly what she said. And yet, in the back of her mind, a thought lingered. They wouldn't have called her if they weren't desperate, which meant something bigger was going on. The next morning, when she opened her workshop door, there was a Navy helicopter on the dock. Rotors spinning, crew waiting. And Carla knew her. Day was about to get much more complicated. The warm and loud narrator's voice, clear, confident, and easy to understand. The morning mist clung to the water like a heavy blanket. The horizon blurred where the gray sky met the steel blue sea. Carla Reyes stepped out of her small workshop, a chipped ceramic mug of coffee in hand, expecting to hear nothing but gulls and the rhythmic lap of waves against the dock. Instead, the deep bones-shaking thump of rotor blades filled the air. A Navy MH-60 Sea Hawk helicopter hovered just above the dock, its downwash scattering empty auto rags, sending coils of rope slithering across the planks. The wind whipped at Carla's hair, blowing loose strands across her face. She instinctively narrowed her eyes against the grit and salt spray. The Seahawk descended, landing with a final heavy thunk. The crew hatch slid open, and a tall lieutenant in a crisp uniform stepped out, ducking slightly under the spinning blades. "Carla Reyes," he called over the noise. Carla set her mug down on the windowsill and crossed her arms. "That depends on who's asking. I'm Lieutenant Harris, Pacific Naval Operations. Admiral Lawson sent me. He requests your immediate presence." "At Kitsapat Base." Carla raised an eyebrow. "Didn't I just fix your problem?" Harris didn't smile. "Ma'am, the Admiral wants to speak with you in person. You'll want to hear this." There was something in his tone, measured, respectful, but with a weight behind it that made her set aside the sarcasm. She grabbed her dented silver toolbox, the same one she'd carried into hangars, engine rooms, and warships for years, and slung it into the helicopter without another word. The crew chief offered her a headset as they lifted off. The world outside blurred, her small harbor town shrinking below, boats bobbing like toys in the water, the dock receding until it was nothing but a thin brown line against the blue-gray expanse. Inside the Seahawk, Carla sat strapped into a webbed seat, her boots planted on the metal floor, toolbox by her side. Harris glanced at her across the narrow cabin. "You made quite an impression yesterday. Chief Garrison is not exactly quick to admit when he's wrong, but well, let's just say you proved him wrong in record time." Carla smirked. Let me guess. He said it was teamwork." Something like that. Then his tone shifted. "But this isn't about an engine anymore. Not just an engine." Carla leaned forward slightly. "Then what is it about?" Harris hesitated. "The Admiral will explain. All I know is there's a room full of people waiting for you." They landed at Kitsap Base under a sky that looked ready to split open with rain. The Seahawk touched down on the helipad near the waterfront, where a small group of officers stood in a tight formation. At their head was Admiral Lawson himself, hands clasped behind his back. As Carla stepped out, her boots hitting the concrete, Lawson's expression softened ever so slightly. "Carla, I wasn't wrong to call you." "I weren't you," she replied evenly. "But I'm guessing this isn't just a thank you visit." Lawson gestured for her to follow him. "Walk with me." They moved along the pier, the massive hull of the USS Bradford looming up above them. From here, Carla could see her work had paid off. The ship's turbine intakes were humming, a low, steady vibration traveling through the deck. "Yesterday," Lawson began, "you didn't just fix our engine. You kept this mission alive. This operation is classified, but I can tell you it's more important than most we run. Failure was not an option. The President himself will be briefed when it's complete." Carla kept her eyes forward. "Sounds like a good time to have a few backup engineers." Lawson's voice dropped lower. "We had 5. They all missed what you found in under 2 minutes. That's not just skill, Carla. That's instinct. An instinct like that is rare." She glanced sideways at him. "I'm flattered, but you didn't send a helicopter for flattery." They reached the wide metal doors of the intermediate maintenance facility. Inside, the atmosphere was different from the day before. No smirks, no skeptical side eyes. Engineers nodded respectfully as she passed. At the far end of the hangar, Chief Garrison stood by the control panel. When he saw her, he stepped forward. "I owe you an apology," he said, his voice tight but sincere. "You were right. Completely right. We aligned the shaft and the output held steady at full throttle. The Bradford's ready to go." Carla studied him for a moment, then gave a small nod. "Good to hear." But Lawson wasn't done. He motioned towards a side door. "Carla, in here." The room was smaller, quieter, lit by a single overhead lamp. On the table lay a folder marked confidential in bold red letters. Lawson opened it and slid a photograph towards her. It was a different ship, smaller, older, but one Carla recognized instantly, the USS Harrow. That ship, Lawson said, suffered a catastrophic engine failure 10 years ago. Officially, it was blamed on preventative maintenance oversight. He looked her dead in the eye. "You were the machinery officer, weren't you?" Carla's jaw tightened. "Yeah, and the blame landed on me. I got the letter, the dismissal, and the silence. I figured that was the end of it." Lawson's tone shifted. Firm, deliberate. "It wasn't your fault. We've re-examined the records. The failure was caused by a defective part from a contracted supplier. It was covered up to protect procurement. You were the scapegoat." Carla felt her stomach twist. For years she'd lived with the quiet humiliation of that stain on her record. Now hearing the truth, it wasn't relief she felt. It was something heavier. "So what now?" she asked finally. Lawson closed the folder. Now you get the recognition you deserved. The Bradford's crew is forming up on the pier. They know who kept them in the fight. They're waiting for you." Carla blinked. "You're not serious." "I'm very serious, and so is the mission. You'll be joining them, not as a consultant, but as part of the crew." Outside, the sky had darkened, the air thick with the scent of oncoming rain. The pier stretched ahead, lined with sailors in perfect formation, their white caps gleaming under the muted light. As Carla approached, the sound of boots snapping to attention echoed across the waterfront. Lawson stopped beside her. "They know your story now, every word of it, and they're about to show you exactly what they think of it." Carla glanced at him. "What's that supposed to mean? You will see." As the first raindrop fell, 200 sailors saluted her in unison. And then, to her shock, the President of the United States stepped out from the crowd. The ceremony ended, but not the eyes on her. Sailors approached in small groups, shaking her hand, clapping her on the shoulder, telling her how close they'd come to missing the mission. Chief Garrison came last, his expression stripped of the arrogance she'd seen before. "I was wrong," he admitted quietly. "About the engine. About you. I've been doing this for 20 years, and you made me realize I still have a lot to learn." "Thank you." Carla didn't gloat. She simply extended her hand. Then we both learned something. By the time the last handshake was done, the pier was slick with rain, puddles reflecting the gray sky in the white of Navy uniforms. The USS Bradford loomed above, its engines humming, ready to sail. Lawson walked her toward the helipad. "Yo, before we go any further, if you're watching from the United States and you believe in honoring those who've given everything for their country, subscribe to The Heart Listens right now and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Your support is what keeps stories like this alive." The rain had begun as a faint patter against the steel deck, but now it fell steady and cold, streaking down the rows of crisp Navy uniforms lined along the pier. 200 sailors stood at rigid attention, the gray sky casting a muted glow on their white caps. Carla stood at the edge of the formation, still in her oil-stained coveralls, toolbox handle biting into her palm. She felt strangely out of place among the pristine uniforms and polished boots, but there was no mistaking the way every eye tracked her movements. Admiral Lawson stepped forward and barked a command. "Company salute." The sound was like a single crack of thunder, 200 hands snapping to brows in perfect unison. For a moment, Carla froze. She'd been saluted before, but not like this, not in such numbers, not with such weight behind it. And then, just beyond the rows of sailors, a new figure emerged from the small crowd of civilians and officers gathered at the far end of the pier. He was unmistakable. The sharp dark suit, the red tie, the instantly recognizable hair catching the gray light. The former President of the United States was walking toward her. The murmur that rippled through the bystanders was quickly swallowed by the pounding rain. Secret Service agents flanked him on either side, scanning the pier with hawk-like eyes. But the President himself never looked away from Carla. When he stopped in front of her, the sailors' salutes held, not wavering for a second. "Miss Ray," he said, voice firm but warm, "I've read the full report. I've heard from Admiral Lawson, from the crew, from everyone who watched what you did. And I have to tell you, this country is better because of people like you." Carla shifted her weight, caught off guard by the sincerity in his tone. "I just fixed an engine, sir." He smiled faintly. "Engines don't win missions. People do, and you did." The President reached into the inside pocket of his suit and withdrew a small dark blue case embossed with the presidential seal. When he opened it, the gold glint of the Navy Distinguished Service Medal caught the muted daylight. "This medal," he said, holding it up, "is not given lightly. It's awarded for exceptional service to the government in a duty of great responsibility. I believe bringing the Bradford back to life under the circumstances you faced qualifies in every sense." He stepped forward, draping the ribbon over her head with steady hands. The metal disc rested against her chest, cold from the rain. But he didn't step back right away. He continued, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "I have a daughter named Tiffany, and I hope one day she grows into the kind of woman who doesn't hesitate to do what is right, no matter who's watching." "You've set that example." Carla's throat tightened. She didn't have the words, so she simply nodded. The president turned toward the crowd and raised his voice again. "Let this moment be a reminder. America is built on the hands and hearts of those who step forward when it matters most. Miss Reyes is one of those people. And for her service, I am personally awarding her not just this medal, but something to ensure she never has to choose between survival and service again." From somewhere behind the formation, an aide approached, carrying a heavy white envelope. The president took it and handed it to Carla. Inside, printed on thick ivory paper, was a deed. A deed to a $5 million home on Bainbridge Island. The crowd broke into applause, sailors still holding their salute until Lawson gave the command to drop arms. Carla stood still, the metal cold against her skin, the envelope heavy in her hands. It was surreal. 48 hours ago, she'd been elbowed deep in an engine bay, working for a paycheck that barely covered her workshop rent. Now she was standing on a Navy pier in the rain, the president himself praising her in front of 200 sailors. You don't have to go back to that little workshop. The Navy could use someone like you officially this time." Carlos smiled faintly. "I'll think about it," and she meant it. As the helicopter lifted off, she glanced back through the rain-streaked window. The Bradford was already casting off, tugboats guiding her toward open water. From above, the formation of sailors was still visible. Tiny white dots against the pier, standing in perfect lines. And somewhere in the middle of it all, she realized the weight she'd carried for years, the blame, the doubt, the quiet bitterness was lighter. For the first time in a long time, she was more than just an engineer with a past. She was Carla's Navy veteran, and the sea had just given her back her name. If you're from the USA and you believe in honoring veterans, subscribe to The Heart Listens now and watch the next story on our channel, because heroes like Carla Reyes deserve to be remembered. The helicopter touched down softly on the wet grass, behind Carla's small workshop, the rotor wash scattering fallen leaves in spirals across the yard. The same yard where she'd spent years alone repairing engines that most people had given up on. She stepped down with her medal still around her neck, the ribbon damp from the rain, the envelope with the deed clutched under one arm. For a moment, she just stood there, watching the aircraft lift off again, its blades whipping the air into a roar before fading into the distance. And then silence. The kind of silence you notice only after days of constant noise, the hum of engines, the thud of boots on steel decks, the steady hiss of rain on the pier. She walked inside her workshop, closing the door behind her. The familiar smell of machine oil and salt air greeted her like an old friend. Tools still hung where she'd left them. An unfinished outboard motor sat on the workbench half disassembled. It was as if the last 72 hours had never happened. Except they had. She set the medal down on the bench next to a small framed photograph. It was one she hadn't looked at in years. Her standing on the deck of a destroyer in her 20s, wind in her hair, eyes full of that reckless certainty only the young have. She remembered the pride back then, how she believed service meant everything, how the betrayal had crushed that belief in one swift, unceremonious dismissal. And now, somehow it had come full circle. As the day passed, word of what had happened spread faster than she expected. First, it was a knock on the door. A fisherman from down the road bringing a thermos of coffee for the hero. Then, a group of local high school students asking if they could hear the story from the start. She told it simply, no embellishments, no heroics, just the truth. One of the kids asked, "So what are you going to do now?" She smiled faintly. "I guess I'm going to fix engines, but maybe not just engines." That evening, she stood on the shoreline behind her workshop. The tide was coming in, the sun low and orange on the horizon. In the distance, she thought she could almost see the faint silhouette of the USS Bradford on its mission, carving a path through the open water. She imagined the crew, the thrum of the engines she'd brought back to life. She imagined them running smooth, reliable, ready for whatever came next. It wasn't just about fixing something broken. It never had been. It was about giving people the chance to move forward. A week later, Carla got a call from Admiral Lawson. He said, "Got a proposition for you. We've been talking with the engineering command. There's an opening for a civilian consultant. Flexible hours, good pay, no politics, just the work." "The kind of work you're built for?" Carla hesitated. "And you think the Navy's ready for me again?" Lawson chuckled. "Carla, I think the question is, are you ready for the Navy?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she glanced around her workshop. The tools, the unfinished jobs, the life she'd built in quiet defiance of the way things ended before. Maybe, she thought, some doors are worth walking through twice. That weekend, she made the drive to Bainbridge Island to see the house the president had given her. The place was nothing like she expected. Wide glass windows facing the water, cedar siding, a deck big enough to watch the tides roll in for hours. She stood in the empty living room, the sound of gulls faint through the glass, and realized something unexpected. She didn't feel like she was moving into a reward. She felt like she was moving into a responsibility. Because gifts like this, they came with an unspoken promise to live in a way that justified them. Her first night in the house, she sat on the deck with a mug of coffee, watching the moonlight ripple across the waves. She thought about the sailors, the president's words, the sound of 200 salutes cracking through the rain. She thought about how fast things can change, not just in the Navy, but in life. One moment you're invisible, the next you're standing in the center of something bigger than you with no time to prepare. And when that moment comes, all you can do is show up. Months later, she was standing in another hangar, this one in San Diego, watching a group of young mechanics troubleshoot a stubborn turbine. They had asked her to observe, maybe offer some advice, but she stayed back, letting them work first. She wanted them to trust their own instincts first. Finally, when the chief engineer asked her to step in, she did, not with a lecture. With a single question, "What do you hear?" They gave her puzzled looks, but then they listened, really listened. And in the whirring, in the faint vibration, they found the answer. She smiled. That was the point, not to fix every problem herself, but to teach others to see and hear what she had learned over a lifetime. As the sun set that evening, she drove back to Bainbridge Island, the road quiet, the water beside her reflecting the last streaks of orange and purple. Her phone buzzed with a message from Lawson. It was just a photo. The USS Bradford at sea, wake trailing behind it, and a short caption, "Still running smooth." She laughed softly to herself and tucked the phone away. In the end, Carla Reyes didn't think of herself as a hero. She didn't think of herself as the woman who stood in the rain while 200 sailors saluted her, or as the recipient of a presidential medal and a $5 million home. She thought of herself as an engineer, a veteran, a woman who listened when the world told her something was broken and then did everything she could to set it right, and maybe that was enough. If you're from the USA and you believe in honoring veterans like Carla Reyes, subscribe to The Heart Listens now and watch the next story on our channel. Because stories like hers aren't just about the past.